As Barb said, we're really, this is sort of a frontline conversation talking about where we are, some of the challenges we've faced at different institutions, what's worked, what hasn't, and like that. And just as a sort of a preliminary, our focus here will be a little bit of Q&A back and forth. Absolutely invite questions from the audience as we go forward. And in keeping with the theme of the day about neutrality, we're going to be PowerPoint neutral today and not have any slides. So what I'm going to ask folks to do is just one by one, just sort of give a brief intro on themselves, what their relationship is to the institution they're with, where their institution is in this process, what's worked and what hasn't, and then we'll go from there.
Hello, everybody. My name is Chloe Maxmin. I'm a senior at Harvard College, and I co-founded the Divest Harvard campaign. Thank you very much for having me here. Before I get started, there are other students in this room, and so I was wondering if you all could just raise your hands, because these folks should also be resources for the youth voice as well. So that blue dot under conflict, more heat than light, all the way at the bottom, that's Harvard, because they're so entrenched in the status quo that they can't see that there's any other way to move forward in life. I just wanted to give a little bit of background on our situation at Harvard, because I think it's a very good analogy for how the fossil fuel industry relates to the climate movement. So Harvard has an endowment that's about $36.4 billion. We have the largest endowment in the world. We're the second largest nonprofit, which, with the exception of the Vatican. The board that runs the university is called the Harvard Corporation, and they're the oldest corporation in the Western Hemisphere. So there's a lot of old money, a lot of business as usual happening at Harvard. We've been running our campaign for 3 years. We started in the fall of 2012. We've heard some ridiculous arguments from our administration. They told us to thank BP one time. Our president said, "What's next? Are we going to divest from sugar?" And other things like that. But instead of letting this very intransigent administration stifle our voices, I believe, and Divest Harvard believes, that standing up for what you love is much greater than hiding from what you fear. So we have built a massive, massive movement on campus. We started with 3 people, literally 3 people. At our first meeting, we had 10 people. And now, 3 years later, we have over 70,000 people that have signed on to our campaign. Wow. So a logical question is, how did that happen? There's so many different facets of our campaign, and I'm still trying to figure out what we did right. I think there are 3 main components. The first is that our core value is empathy. We have empathy for other students who don't want to be activists. We have empathy for our president, who tells us that she wants to invest in companies that are destroying our futures. We believe that we need to live a different set of values. So that leads into the second reason, which is that Divest Harvard is consciously and intentionally modeling a different way of behaving with each other and interacting with other people and creating campaigns. Come to any of our meetings and you'll see how we make decisions, where if there's any person that has a doubt, that we'll discuss it. We have democratic decision-making processes. We have very inclusive spaces so that anyone can have their voices heard in our campaign. Another reason that we've been able to push forward so strongly is that we've used so many different tactics. And within all of those diverse tactics, we have multiple levels of engagement. So people can get involved if they have 1 hour to spare every semester, or if they want to make Divest Harvard the central point of their life. To give you an example of this, I was thinking about what we've done over the past year. And it's a lot. Last fall, we fasted for 72 hours. And then we sued Harvard for investing in fossil fuel companies. And then this spring, we did a sit-in outside our president's office where we weren't allowed to use the bathroom, but we did it anyways. And then we just finished Harvard Heat Week, which was 5 days of civil disobedience in Harvard Yard, where we literally shut down our administration buildings for the entire 5 days. So there is a huge, huge movement happening at Harvard, and it's just one of many incredibly exciting and inspiring student movements across this country and world.
Thanks, Chloe. My name is Craig Wruck. I'm Vice President for University Advancement at Humboldt State University. It's a small state institution, part of the California state system. We're located right on the north coast, just south of Oregon. We're not just north of San Francisco, we're quite a ways north of San Francisco. Humboldt started down this road 2 years ago, and I want to recognize at the outset there are 3 things really that made the experience different at Humboldt State. One is we are, as a university, we are known for social responsibility, but also for our strong academic programs in the natural sciences and particularly in ecology. And that's been long-standing, and so, for example, we have alumni who are lumberjacks and who are tree huggers, and chances are they both went to the forestry program. So we have a history of having these sort of tough conversations on campus. And as I said, social responsibility has always been an important value at Humboldt State. So that was one thing that made it a little easier for us. We were a little more inclined to engage in the conversation. Our location and size, frankly, made it a bit easier. I'm actually closer to Seattle, Washington than I am to the CSU office in Long Beach. And so you can sometimes do things without attracting a lot of attention. And we're small. Our endowment, our total invested funds are right now about $27 million, so it isn't an enormous challenge to try to move those things. And then the third thing is I think we really did a good job of listening to our students. Our students approached us with this. This was not something that we chose to do, and we chose to engage them and to have that conversation. So the conversation started just about 2 years ago in the spring. We had a group of students who approached the administration. They were well armed with their 350.org materials, and they demanded that we divest their money from fossil fuels. And so we engaged in a conversation about exactly whose money is it anyway. And actually there was a bit of backlash initially. Initially we as the administration got our backs up a little bit. We have had a socially responsible investment screen since 2004. We measure ourselves against the market as a whole. We're generally about half better than the market as a whole, and we thought that was pretty good. And we actually discussed what can we do to placate these students and make them go away, and we said, aha, they are demanding that we divest from fossil fuel investments. Well, the fact is we are totally in commingled funds, so we have no direct investments. So we can just tell them that we have already divested from fossil fuel investments because we have no single holdings. Fortunately, we decided it was probably best not to mislead our students in quite so public a way. And so we had a more serious conversation. And we decided that really, as good as we are, we could do better. And there was a year of really intense conversation. The students were part of all of these meetings. The meetings got more civil, I would say, as the year went on. And a year ago, our foundation, we have an institutionally related foundation, our foundation adopted what they call the Humboldt Investment Pledge, and it has 3 elements to it. One is we have broadened the definition of concerning sectors to include the entire energy sector. We had a lot of conversation about, does it make sense to focus on the coal producers and then give a free pass to the utilities who burn the coal? And we realized that we don't have the tools right now to separate all those out. And we had long discussions about there are some utilities that are actually doing a good job. But we decided, at least for now, until this all sorts out, we should just eliminate the entire energy sector. The other thing we did is we realized that we will, because of our size, always be in institutional funds, will always be in a commingled environment. But we believe that there must be a way to work within that environment. And so we challenged ourselves to find a way within institutional funds, find investments that would meet our screens. And we've actually made some progress in the last year in doing that. There are institutional funds that can meet our screens. The third thing that we did was, is the one that had the most unintended and positive consequences. We said that we've done a good job of tracking the bad investments that we make, and we know that we'll always have to make some of them. We'll squeeze them out as much as we can. But we'll keep tracking those bad investments, but let's also track the positive investments that we make. And let's start to create a ratio between the two. So let's not just be focused on what we should stop doing. Let's focus on the things that we could do. The students were a little suspicious about this. They thought, aha, we've caught you. Now you're going to try to tell us that the trees on campus actually are sequestering carbon, and indeed we did tell them that. And that's good enough, and so the students are right to be a bit suspicious. But we're working on this ratio good to bad investments. What has happened as we've had that conversation, several things are just remarkable. One is we have realized that there are some energy improvements we can make on campus to our campus buildings with relatively modest investments that make an enormous difference. And we've actually had donors come forward, and our foundation has actually funded some fairly simple improvements that are actually making a major difference on the campus. I don't think that would have happened. We've also started working with some of our faculty members to bring more of a public light to the work that they're doing. So we have a couple of scientists who are working on a process for converting biomass directly into hydrogen, which then fuels hydrogen fuel cells. They've done it on a laboratory scale. They have some significant Department of Energy funding, but because of the philanthropic dollars, minor dollars, they've also launched a website and they're sharing that technology far and wide. I don't think that would have happened had we not had that conversation. And then most surprising to me, because fundraising is part of my division, we've found all sorts of opportunities for donor involvement. We have a donor who has stepped forward and said, I'd like you to accelerate the rate at which you are divesting. What sort of a contribution would it take to the endowment to make it possible for you to move more quickly? We have other donors who have come to us and said, I'd like to make a contribution to the endowment, but I want my fund to be invested totally green. We haven't yet had the donor who comes forward and says, I'd like you to invest entirely in fossil fuels, but I suppose we'll entertain that conversation if it comes along. And we are actually seeing donors who are coming forward and saying, I'd like to make a contribution to help the campus with some of those current energy projects. So I would say the key to it for us was involving the students early and working with them. And I've heard trepidation about that here. My advice to you is don't be frightened. They're not harmful. At the 1 year mark when our board actually took this vote, they were congratulating themselves on how bold they had been. And one of the student leaders actually stood from the galley and he raised his hand sort of 1960s style. And he said, this board has done nothing of the sort. You haven't been bold. You haven't been courageous. And he went on sort of a tear. And the board felt really good. It was a split decision. They got to a very difficult decision. We didn't bind him and gag him and haul him from the room. There were some tense conversations in the hallway afterwards. He has remained involved. It's all part of the process, I think, to engage these young people. And I will tell you, if our students don't stay involved, we will drift. So we are counting on our students to hold our feet to the fire to make sure that we move down these roads.
Hi, everyone. My name is Todd Kilburn. I'm the Vice President for Business Affairs and CFO at Naropa University, a small university of about 1,000 students, about a half hour north of here in beautiful Boulder, Colorado. First, I want to make sure, can you all hear me over my tie? Yeah, okay, good. As I think about what we have done at Naropa, we made the choice to divest in the fall of 2013. And I have to say, when people ask me what was the single most reason, the forefront of how you made that decision, my answer is simply because Naropa is awesome. And I mean that because there are systems and a history in place that helped us to make this decision that have been going on for years. The university has a history of engaging questions about its endowment in light of its mission. This was not a new conversation for us. And so when it came to us, it really came through a group we call the Naropa Sustainability Council. It's a group of individuals comprised of students, faculty, staff, and board members who meet on a monthly basis and give guidance to the administration on issues of sustainability. I stay removed from it, not because I don't care, but because I actually want that group to have the freedom to challenge the administration on the things that we're doing. And out of those conversations, a student group who had been reading the 350.org website started talking to one of our trustees who had also been reading the 350.org website. And they said, we should have some further conversations around this. And so the trustee called me and said, we'd like to get a group of students together to talk about our endowment and how we invest our endowment. And I know that the typical party line is, no, wait, I don't want to talk to students. That's not the way we do things where we are. So we sat down and we brought in our portfolio, and we looked at our portfolio for several hours with students who said, why is this here? Why is this part of this fund? Why have you invested in this particular area? And as a result of that conversation, it really grew as a unified movement from students and from the board and from the administration to bring our endowment policy in line with our mission. And so within a year of those initial conversations, we divested from fossil fuels. And for those of you in higher education, 1 year to me is Mach 1 speed for us to move. We moved and turned it around. So we still face some challenges. It's not been completely easy, but I will say the process, the human element, which is pretty much what I'd like to talk about today, has been one of mutual engagement and respect and conversation and transparency from the very beginning. And I think that's part of why we were able to move as quickly as we were to that decision.
So I'm George Hanley from the Board of Trustees at University of Dayton. I spoke and told my story this morning. So I'm good.
Okay.
As long as everybody else is.
I didn't introduce myself. I'm David Dinerman. I'm the chair of the investment committee at Hampshire College. I've been on the board of trustees there for 6 years, and at the risk of smelling my own perfume, Hampshire story is a little different than the rest of the folks here. Actually, the leadership in our situation came from really sort of two places. One is that the college got sort of hijacked in 2010 by a group called Students for Justice in Palestine, who made the claim that Hampshire had divested from Israel when in fact it hadn't. And it really forced us to take a look at our investment policy and say, what do we want to do here? And it was my predecessor on the investment committee led an effort to rewrite our policy with an eye towards having it be based on positive screens, very ESG oriented. And out of that, coupled with the election or the hiring of Jonathan Lash, who many of whom you know, who is the former head of the World Resource Institute as our president, Jonathan is both a very practical and a very committed environmentalist. And he challenged us. He said, you know, I want us to be smart about this, but I want to be able to go to the world and say, we're not invested in the 4 worst of these folks, which is Arch and Peabody Coal, Exxon, and Chevron. And that started a whole conversation for us at the board level. This is all prior to anything coming from students, where we said, okay, what do we want to do here? And in working with our outside investment advisor, we said, okay, we've got a couple places. One is, our endowment's fairly small, so again, we're in commingled funds only. We had to look at it through that prism. And then, as has been discussed earlier today, you know, how do you draw the lines? You know, do you include Southern Company because they burn a lot of coal? Do you include the J.P. Morgan because they finance a lot of these companies? Where do you draw the lines on what's carbon free? So we began to move the line, and we went from about just under 3% exposure. We're now about 75 basis points. And again, this is you know, any company that has any meaningful exposure to the SIC classes that 350.org includes in their list. So it could be a company that supplies piping to the natural gas companies. We're out of that, except to the tune of about less than 1%. The real catalyst for us, which is the ultimate thing on this, was a couple things. One is Hampshire has always been a leader in this sort of alignment of mission and how it invests its money. It was an early leader on divesting from South Africa in the 1970s. We had this whole question around the Israel question, which we ultimately didn't go to, and this one is a sort of a natural follow to that. What we've done with it is that we're really looking to use this really in 2 ways. One is to really up our game and engage the students in this, and I've been trying to get students to engage on the corporate advocacy side with this. And the other is that it's really forcing us to really identify and be clear about what our principles are and how those tie to what we do with our money. Next week, I'm going to be in Amherst for trustee meetings, and I'm going to be meeting with a group of students who want us to divest from the private prison industry as a result of their involvement with Black Lives Matter. Fortunately, we're not in that, but I'm going to use this as an opportunity to educate there and say, okay, so you know, how far do you want to go with this? Does that include things like not investing in companies that use a lot of prison-based labor as part of their cost structure. And it's really about using this as an educational opportunity, which in my mind is very consistent with our principles and our mission. So I think that integration is really an essential part of to be successful in an academic environment, what you have to do. So on that note, I'm going to open this up to a couple questions that we've put together here. I'm going to start with you, George. What was the administration's role in your effort here on campus?
With the divestment?
Yeah.
Yeah. So the president, Dan Kern, had a very large role, and what actually came to light is that he had done his PhD dissertation on worker rights in the mining industry. So, a big social justice issue. And he was also nearing the end of his 14 years at University of Dayton, and I think he was thinking about his legacy. And so he was very, very instrumental from the administration standpoint in taking a lead in getting this done. Now, on the flip side, the staff from the VP of Finance's office really didn't want to do this, and really tried to sabotage this. One of the reasons you'll hear why institutions will say, well, we can't do this, is because we have an outsourced CIO. So Dayton's endowment's like $675 million, and we have an outsourced CIO role. So usually you outsource that role if you have a smaller size endowment, but it's not an excuse. So most of the reasons why people say we can't divest, when you really look at them, they're very, very weak. And as you've all heard today, the reasons to divest and invest, I think, are very, very strong and very powerful.
Okay. Craig, you talked a fair amount about how this unfolded on your campus. Were there particular moments where there sort of tipping points or catalysts that occurred that you can highlight?
I think so. One of the early board meetings, the students made a presentation, and I don't mean to demean it at all, but it was sort of a packaged presentation. It's correct information, but it was the 350.org party line. And the board took the time to listen to that. There was some resistance to giving them that much time, and some worry that we need to build a fence around them, we need to limit them, maybe have one of those red light things to stop them from talking, but we didn't do that. And they got an entire hour to talk to the board, and they stayed. I think that was critical too. They stayed for the day and interacted informally with the board members. And I think in the end, when the board had to make the tough decisions, that helped, that they had already heard from these students, that they understood the arguments.
Okay. Chloe, you obviously face a more difficult situation with the entrenchment at Harvard. You talked a little bit about sort of what the current actions are. What do you see as the next steps to try to move this conversation forward?
I'm going to answer this question in a more personal way. I was going to talk about tactics more. I'm going to preface this by saying that I fully appreciate, deeply, deeply appreciate the opportunities that I've had at Harvard, but I've spent most of my time there absolutely furious with how the administration has treated us. I've spent 4 years embedding myself in classes that have taught me about climate science with some of the world's top climate scientists. I've studied social movements. I've written every single paper on climate change and or divestment. And then I'm actually trying to put this thought into action, and the president of my university, when we were doing our sit-in, she comes up to us, up to 40 students sitting in outside her office, and she has the angriest look on her face. I mean, so angry that it looks like she's about to cry. And she says that she's disappointed in us, that we're using coercive tactics. Those are direct quotes. And I was so outraged by the hypocrisy, and I didn't know how I could learn at an institution that was so backwards and that was so punishing. I mean, okay, on the scale of things, Harvard is not that punishing. I'm absolutely fine. But emotionally, but then I realized that despite Harvard's intransigence, that it's actually created a community on campus that people now come to because of its humanity. Divest Harvard is filled with passionate, authentic, committed people who want to be around other people who care about social justice, who want to experiment with different ways of being, who want to be honest and open with each other. And so our way forward is to realize that Harvard's intransigence is a gift, that it's an opportunity for us to create a powerful movement and to point out hypocrisy. We have a prime example right in front of us of what the power of the status quo and the influence of the fossil fuel industry. So my new thing is I'm thanking Harvard for that. I'm thanking Harvard for enabling me to find a community of such amazing people. And that, I really, truly think that that is what will enable Divest Harvard to continue in the future. That's why everyone comes to our group.
Okay.
Can I?
Yeah,
expand
absolutely,
on
jump in.
just a little bit? It occurred to me, and just as you were talking, there is an anger, and those of us who are administrators need to be careful not to respond in kind. And I think that anger, frankly, comes from the fact that these young people, it's their world, and we screwed it up. And somehow we feel accountable for that, and so we get very defensive about it. But nothing good comes of meeting anger with anger, and I think we need to capitalize, as you've said, we need to capitalize on the energy that's there, on the passion that's there, and move forward. But make no mistake about it, sometimes these young people are very angry when they approach you.
Well, I mean, the reason why young people are angry, I mean, I believe that anger is a reaction to something that you love being threatened. And so like you said, our anger is because, you know, for me, I'm angry because my home is threatened, and I will do absolutely anything to protect my home. And as activists, at least with Divest Harvard, I think that we all have to reach down to that deeper layer of love so that we're not angry activists, because that's not a sustainable kind of movement.
Todd, you talked a bit about where the sort of the genesis of this came from on your campus. Were there points of resistance that you ran into, and if so, how did you deal with those?
Well, first, I would say that I think because it came from a student as well as from a board member, there wasn't tremendous resistance on an institution-wide basis. I do want to call out that student, whose name is Sopa Harman. She's on a study abroad program in Bhutan and for some reason couldn't be here today. The chair of our endowment committee, Christopher Hormel, they began these conversations. And so I would say there was, at first, if there was any resistance, it wasn't a philosophical resistance. But if there's any resistance, it was probably from me in the, you know, that initial thought of, if we're really going to do this, this is going to take a lot of work on top of what we're already doing. And then you get that moment of, but it's the right work to be doing. And so we actually talked through some of that. And rather than just saying, here's what we're going to do, we actually began some campus-wide conversations with faculty and with staff and with students. We brought our investment advisors to campus to talk with our students about what we were thinking of doing and why we were thinking of doing it and how they had been involved in the process. And so I think by making it a really collaborative effort and helping people to understand that they were part of the solution and it wasn't ultimately just some administrative decision from on high, but that we were all in this together, we were able to get past some of that resistance. And I will say, it doesn't mean that that's the way it always works where we are. But in this particular case, it was a group of people who came together to talk about it, who actually had a vision for this, not necessarily from the fiscal point of view we've been talking about a lot today, but really from the moral question. Is this the right thing for us to do, and how does it align with our mission? So we got there, but I would say that the major resistance was not about doing it. It was about when we do it and to what extent we do it. And once we actually started that work, it moved fairly quickly.
Craig, you talked a little bit earlier about part of your responsibility being in the realm of advancement. You talk a little bit more about the extent to which your office took a leadership role in that context and why?
Yeah, and that may be unique to Humboldt State. Our structure is, my division is responsible for fundraising for our foundation, for external relations, for marketing and communications. I think it helped to have that external look going on. I do agree with George. At any point along the way, there could have been an administrator who brought a screeching halt to this thing. I'm very fortunate, my Vice President for Administrative Affairs and I agree on this, so that made it easier. The other thing that was sort of interesting is we also had a long-term president who announced his retirement at about the beginning, and I'm not suggesting that he would have been opposed to it, but it created this momentary vacuum at the very top where we could get a lot of work done. And then by the time the new president came on, I was able to present her something that was really becoming quite successful and quite notable. And so that was an accident of timing, but it may have taken longer to sort of weld the administration together had it not been for a couple of those things.
George, as we were preparing for this confab here, you made a comment that I thought was really interesting and instructive about the interplay between this and your underlying institutional principles. You spoke a little bit about that this morning. Could you add a little more color on that?
Sure. And I really struggle with how to present my views on this in a calm manner.
You don't have to.
Yeah, because so let me do it from a facetious manner, if I could do that. So we work and we serve these nonprofits, which nonprofits serve the public good. Okay, so, okay, fine. Alignment of mission and values. Okay, fine. Making money. Yes. That's all we're supposed to care about today, right? This is how we're brought up. This is all that really matters. Nonprofits are, at some level, it's really convoluted because it doesn't compute for me at some level. Because if making money is all that you care about, then nothing else really matters. It consumes you. Now, yes, I'm carrying this to an extreme. Students? Who cares about the students? Give me a break. I mean, aren't they just there to bring revenue into our nonprofits? Because all we really care about is how big that endowment gets, because that is power. And let's figure out a reason why and how we're going to justify this, okay? And you know, I had spoken to Chloe briefly last week or something, and she told me they can only get 10 minutes with the president at Harvard, 10-minute appointment. I mean, they should be ashamed of themselves. I mean, at some level, anybody who fights impact investing or value mission-based investing should be ashamed of themselves. And if these universities are not about the students, then what in the hell are we doing? And this is their world, in their future. And we have all these great mission statements and value statements about teaching them all these wonderful things, but then when it comes to making money, oh, well, yeah, let's not talk about that stuff so much because we're in commingled funds or we're gonna do some of it but not all of it, or we're gonna do shareholder advocacy, which is, you know, right, you're gonna advocate ExxonMobil to put themselves out of business? Come on, guys, all right? So, yes, all of the above, hit them every way you possibly can, but this subject is, it's a life subject. And it's very disturbing to me to see how universities treat their students and how they address this subject. Every reason they give why they can't divest is really weak. It's really, really weak. And coming from the financial industry, though we never took outside money, so I'm not trying to sell any services to anybody, I know how the industry works. And they will pivot and change, and they will do what their customers tell them to do. And the excuses, again, they're endless, but they're weak. Sorry to go on and on.
No worries, no worries. Just a comment about Hampshire from that perspective. We have used this as part of a much broader investment in ourselves. We're doing a lot of things to improve our energy efficiency. We've made a commit to be carbon neutral by 2020. We're building 2 buildings that are going to meet the LBC, the Living Building Challenge standards. So this is but part of a consistency of principle for us that I think is absolutely right. I also want to absolutely agree with George about this comment about the disingenuity here and the weakness of the arguments against this. When Harvard published its statement about talking about that its responsibility is to make as much money as possible and that politics can't enter into this discussion, that is utter nonsense. Every investment that you make has political ramifications. Every investment that you make has political implications and connotations. So to say that you're going to do something without that is absurd. So I have one more question. And I invite folks to challenge on that basis, because if you think about it, you know, well, we're going to invest in Chevron because it provides us with dividends or whatever else. Yes, and what you're doing is you're supporting a particular political order. One more question real quick. I want to touch on the fiduciary side of this in one point. One of the things that people argue in the context of investing in oil and gas and carbon stocks and commodities more broadly is it provides a hedge for inflation, and that's a basis under the fiduciary duties that you have to keep that as part of an asset allocation model that aligns with modern portfolio theory. Would any of you folks care to comment on that and how you dealt with that on campus if it came up that way as an issue?
Well, I think that that's an interesting point. I think that there's quite a few vehicles out there to get you exposure to commodity movement. There's so many ETFs that are out there. There's hedge funds that are commodity concentrated. There's managed CTA accounts, which are fully transparent. The money is held in your name. After the debacle of 08, 09, a lot of people moved to CTA managed accounts. You can get out that day if you don't like what's going on, daily liquidity. So there's many other vehicles to be able to replicate that exposure in your portfolio.
Can I?
Sure.
I think the key to remember is we're all learning as we do this. The fund that we've chosen for our energy-free equity portion is actually heavily weighted in the tech sector, and that brings other concerns. But we're going to try it, and we're going to see how it works. We did decide we do a payout percentage like most endowments do. This year, that payout percentage is 0.1% less than it was, because we think there could be some effects here. But we've been very honest with the program people on campus that we're going to adjust that every year. We're going to keep an eye on it. So I think we're learning. I don't think we know. I think anybody who says there's a pat answer is probably wrong.
No, I wasn't suggesting that there was. We'll leave some time for questions.
My name's Nicole Nesbitt. I'm with Brown Advisory, which is a Baltimore-based investment management firm. This has been a really fascinating discussion to listen to. And I've heard a lot of talk about the stakeholders in this, especially with regards to universities that include the students, that include the president, the administration. Maybe you touched on the faculty a little bit. But I'm not sure I really heard yet about another stakeholder, the donors to your endowments. And I'm just wondering how their engagement level has been in this movement. How have you engaged them? What have you heard from them? And what is their sort of tone, so to speak, on this?
So what was interesting, the pros, the for and against feedback that University of Dayton got, it was right around 50-50. Very similar to what the political makeup of this country is. And I'm the chair of the Advancement Committee. So we looked at this and we modeled this out, and we felt we would receive between $25 to $35 million in new gifts if we made this move. Now, the Hanley Foundation made a $12.5 million gift, so that helped in a big part I kind of had some inside information, I guess you could say. And the university will match that gift as part of the agreement. But there was some other $5 to $7 million gifts also that were close. We were getting under six-figure number from fossil fuel industry. But Marathon Oil, which is located in Findlay, Ohio, just north of Dayton, had 58 employees, former University of Dayton employees working at Marathon. So what Marathon did, this was their reaction. They went and made every one of those UD alums remove any UD memorabilia, so like bobbleheads, pennants, from anywhere in their premises. Now, if that's the best you got, then they said, we will never hire another University of Dayton graduate. You know what? We don't need their charity. We're a top Catholic research university. They don't hire our kids because they're doing us a favor, okay? Emerson, GE has just built a huge electronic wiring, aviation wiring research center on our property. And Emerson, we just announced and broke ground on the Emerson Research Center on our property. Jobs for an area that desperately needs jobs, and internships for students. So it's the positive, and boards never talk about the positive. You know, they talk about, you know, they got a call from some nut job someplace, and, you know, next are, you know, we didn't like when we took the guns out, and now, you know, we're taking the fall. So it's been very positive.